My name is Deborah, 62 years old, and I used to be the co-founder of one of the largest real estate corporations in Dallas. But that evening, standing behind the office door and overhearing my daughter-in-law whisper to the lawyer, "As soon as she signs, everything will be ours. She's deaf, she can't hear a thing." I understood. They never truly saw me as family. What they didn't know was, I had heard everything. After 15 years of silence, I had just regained my hearing. And I chose to remain quiet, to find out who was truly lying. Have you ever been betrayed by your own family? If you've ever felt pushed out of your own life, leave a comment below. Tap like and subscribe to this channel if you believe the truth always finds a way to speak. Because what they were about to do next? You won't believe it. I used to be a high school teacher, teaching American literature for 15 years. Those were years I truly loved my job. Loved seeing the spark in my students' eyes when they discovered Emily Dickinson or Hemingway. I met David at a community education seminar. He wasn't a teacher, he was a real estate investor looking to develop housing near public schools. We sat next to each other and laughed at how dry the presentation was. I had no idea that one coffee invitation afterward would lead to 30 years of partnership. David wasn't loud, but every decision he made carried weight. When I suggested starting a business with him, using my life savings to buy an old building in West Dallas, he didn't hesitate. "You're not just the person walking beside me," he told me that night. "You're the one laying the foundation." We named the company D&D Properties, after our initials, but also standing for devotion and discipline. With all our passion, we renovated every old apartment, rebuilt every foundation, and negotiated every contract. What we built wasn't just real estate. It was trust. I remember rushing from boardrooms to evening classes, and David staying up all night with blueprints just to preserve a customer's oak tree, even when it meant adding thousands of dollars in cost. We had 2 children, Benjamin and Amy. When they were little, they'd doodle on their dad's blueprints or run barefoot through construction sites. I used to think, growing up in a happy family, they would surely understand the value of what we built. But life doesn't always go as we expect. 6 years ago, David was diagnosed with late-stage pancreatic cancer. The disease came like a storm. We had barely 7 months from diagnosis until the day he left this world. On his hospital bed, David gripped my hand tightly. "Don't let them push you out of your own life, Deb. Promise me that," he said. I nodded, my tears falling on his hand, hot and desperate. After he passed, I held the company's majority shares. To investors, I was the wise but quiet widow. To my children and grandchildren, I became the aging mother. A year later, the accident happened. It was a rainy afternoon. I was driving home from a meeting with a partner when an SUV ran a red light. The accident didn't take my life, but it permanently took my hearing. The doctor said the inner ear damage was severe and irreversible. From that day on, everything fell into an eerie silence. I could no longer hear the sound of my granddaughter's feet running toward me, or Amy playing the piano during the holidays. I tried to learn sign language, used speech-to-text software, and practiced reading lips, but the world around me started to speak less. Or maybe they spoke, just not to me. At first, Benjamin and Amy seemed concerned, but soon after they began answering my emails, handling contracts, and even speaking for me during shareholder meetings. "Don't worry, Mom, I've got it," Benjamin said during one board meeting. "You can't hear, no need to stress yourself." I wanted to type on the electronic board that I could still read, think, and understand, but by then the discussion had moved on. Bit by bit, I was pushed away from the core of the company I had built. The tipping point came last March, when I was preparing to attend the annual shareholder conference. I had picked out a soft blue shirt that David had loved and carefully wrote my speech on the projector. But just before I was to take the stage, Amy came backstage and whispered, clearly enough for me to read her lips, "Mom, let me do the speech. You can't hear audience questions. It'll just be awkward. I'll say exactly what you wrote." I watched my daughter walk up to the podium, speak fluently, and receive thunderous applause, and I sat quietly in the back row, like some honorary guest they invited out of courtesy. That was when I realized I was no longer a co-founder, no longer a leader, but just a name on paper. No one forced me out of my position. But they, the very people I loved, had gently pushed me out of the life I had built with everything I had. And the part that hurt most wasn't what they did, it was that they truly believed I hadn't noticed. But I remembered David's words. I had made him a promise, and I hadn't forgotten. Not for a moment. I started to notice something unusual one morning in October as I reviewed my bank statements like I'd done for years. Even though I couldn't hear anymore, I never let anyone touch my main account. I knew every number, every transaction, every bill and scheduled transfer. But that morning, a withdrawal of $10,000 caught my eye. It was labeled as a donation to something called the Deborah Foundation, Learning for the Future. I had never created such a foundation. I put on my reading glasses and checked the receiving account. It pointed to a small branch bank in Austin. Even stranger, the note on the transfer clearly stated, Honor Scholarship, Ellie Robbins. I stared at the name. Ellie was Benjamin's stepdaughter, my granddaughter. I loved her. She was sweet, smart, and had made me handmade birthday cards since preschool, but I had never signed any document granting her a scholarship in my name. No one had ever asked me. I opened my laptop, accessed the internal banking system, and started digging through recent transactions. Every step was slow, as the voice-to-text software no longer helped me. But I was patient, and the more I saw, the colder I felt. In just 3 months, 6 separate charity withdrawals had been made in my name, each one small enough not to raise red flags on a quick review. Community grants, scholarships, summer camp support. But combined, they totaled over $40,000, all from my personal account. Not the company's. Not the family trust. Mine. Money I had set aside for retirement, for maintaining David's old properties, and to pay Lana, my loyal assistant of 20 years. I didn't believe this was a bank error. Someone with access to my account had moved that money. The only person with that access, aside from me, was Benjamin. 3 years ago, thinking I could no longer handle fast-paced online banking, I had added him as a co-signer for emergencies. I still remember the day we signed the form. He placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "I just want you to feel safe, Mom. If anything happens, I'll handle it all." I never imagined anything would come like this. I called Lana into my office. She brought chamomile tea, always knowing what I needed before I even asked. I pointed to the screen and typed a few lines for her to read. "Have you ever heard of the Deborah Foundation?" Lana frowned. "No, ma'am, but now that I think about it, a couple weeks ago Amy mentioned something about printing thank you letters for scholarship donors. I assumed it was from HR, didn't know it was connected to you." I was stunned. Since when had my name become a tool for others to boost their image, spend money, and gain influence, while I, the legal owner of the entire operation, knew nothing about it? I started digging deeper. Lana helped me check internal records. Everything had been electronically signed by proxy from my account, using Benjamin's access. A silent anger rose in my chest, but I didn't act yet. I needed to understand the full scope, and most importantly, I needed to remain silent. The next day, I drove to Dr. Gregory's private clinic. He had overseen my health since the accident. He was the only one who knew I had undergone surgery to restore my hearing, and the one who signed the medical documents when I enrolled in the cochlear implant trial 3 months prior. The appointment had been scheduled in advance, so he wasn't surprised to see me. I didn't say anything. I simply handed him a handwritten note. "Have you told anyone that I'm regaining my hearing?" Gregory looked up, slightly flustered. I'm not sure what you mean. I only confirmed it with the Research Institute and the insurance company. Everything else I've kept strictly confidential, as you requested." I quietly opened my bag and pulled out a printout from the company's internal email system. It was a thank you letter from Amy addressed to a Dr. Gregory T. West, thanking him for assisting and sharing details about my mother's recovery progress to help develop a long-term care plan. At the bottom of the letter was Amy's signature and the logo of the law office Robbins and West. I handed it to Gregory. He looked at it, then sank heavily into his chair. I didn't. I thought it was for a good cause. Amy said she needed confirmation to help protect your interests. I had no idea they'd use it to set up a new power of attorney. His voice trembled, his eyes dropped to the floor. I didn't take money. I just didn't say no to a small thank you gift. I said nothing else. I stood up, looked at him for a long moment, then turned and walked out. He called after me. Deborah, please believe me, I didn't mean any harm. I didn't look back. On the way home, I stared out the car window. The Texas sky was pale gray and hung low like a warning. The silence of the last 15 years had once been my deepest wound. But it turned out, it also made me the easiest person to deceive. Everything I had once trusted, family, dignity, my own authority, now seemed like just a name for others to use. I took a deep breath. In my heart, the answer had started to take shape. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about trust. And I needed to know what else they were hiding from me. Ever since regaining my hearing, I had been living in two parallel worlds. One was full of sound, where I could hear the click of Lana's heels on the wooden floor, the wind rattling the bedroom windows, and even the subtle sighs of my son every time he looked at me like he was calculating something. The other world, I pretended to live in it. The world of a mother, a grandmother who couldn't hear anything, who always smiled and nodded politely when the kids waved or passed her quick notes. I lived between two curtains, choosing not to lift them, at least not yet. Lana was the only one who knew I could hear again. She wasn't shocked, just gripped my hand tightly. "You can finally hear the world again," she said, her eyes filled with emotion. I smiled, then pointed to my forehead. "And I want to listen. Carefully." We started making plans. First came the recording system. I couldn't keep fumbling around with notes and vague impressions. I needed proof. Lana knew a retired tech engineer, Mr. Howard, who used to design internal security systems for our company. After hearing a brief version of the situation, he didn't ask further questions. He showed up at the house early one morning with a small wooden box containing recording devices no larger than a fingertip. "These will only record when they detect human voices," he explained. "I'll hide them in picture frames, under the coffee table, behind the potted plants. No one will ever notice." Within 3 days, the entire ground floor and my private office were equipped with hidden recorders. Lana handled everything, from changing batteries to managing the files, while I continued playing the role of a quiet, slow, and completely deaf old woman. Each evening, I would listen to the recordings from the day before. Some clips were harmless, Lana calling a plumber, the cleaning crew chatting about lunch. But then, there were snippets that chilled me to the bone. On Thursday afternoon, around 4 o'clock, Amy came over. I stayed upstairs, pretending to nap to avoid having to socialize. Lana made her tea, then went down to the kitchen. I sat silently behind the door, eyes on the balcony, wearing a tiny Bluetooth earpiece that streamed live audio from the living room recorder. I heard Amy pull out her phone, dial a number, and the sound of the ringing tone echoed clearly. "Hi, this is Amy Robbins. I need to speak with you privately." Her voice dropped lower. I turned the volume up. "It's about my mother. She's no longer mentally competent. I want to know the legal process for temporarily placing her in a special care facility. No, not just any regular nursing home. I want one with the legal grounds to grant temporary financial guardianship. Yes, to me." I sat frozen. My breath caught in my chest. Amy, the daughter who once weighed barely 6 pounds in my arms, who spent hours practicing piano just to play me, "You Are My Sunshine," on my 50th birthday, was now planning to commit me to a care facility just to seize control of my assets. I understand I'll need medical records, Amy continued, but Dr. Gregory can help. I've already sent him a thank you letter. Her voice was cold, firm, without the slightest tremble. I closed my eyes, gripping the chair arm until my fingers went numb. In that instant, every memory of family dinners, every night I nursed Amy through high fevers, every tear I shed the day she gave birth to her first child, became shattered fragments in the air of betrayal I was now hearing. After the call, Amy calmly sipped her tea. When Lana returned to the living room, Amy smiled sweetly and asked, "Has Mom been sleeping okay?" "Poor thing. She's so quiet these days it worries me." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in front of the mirror staring at my own reflection in the soft yellow light of the desk lamp. There were crow's feet near my eyes, a few sunspots on my left cheek, but my gaze remained clear and steady, just like it was the day David and I negotiated our first deal. I thought about the promise I made to him. I remembered him saying, "If you ever lose your hearing, listen with your instincts. That never fails." I had heard enough, and now I was beginning to see clearly. The fake smiles, the hands that touched me only to gather fingerprints, the polite questions just to test if I was still sharp enough. The next morning, I told Lana, "I want to review the power of attorney and the Lakeview property contracts." She didn't ask why. She just nodded. Then I pulled out the tiny earpiece and tucked it into my pocket. In my heart, I knew everything was about to change, and I was the one writing the script. No one knew I was listening. No one knew I could see. But I knew this for certain. Whatever came next wouldn't be their game anymore. That afternoon, Dallas wasn't its usual blinding sun, but oddly overcast, as if the entire sky was hiding a secret. I was upstairs in my study, the window slightly ajar to let in the breeze. Lana had gone downtown to pick up dinner. I sat in my armchair, the nearly invisible earpiece hidden behind my silver waves. The recording devices were still quietly running, especially the one under the crystal lamp in the downstairs living room. The front door creaked open, followed by the soft clack of leather shoes on hardwood. It was Benjamin. His voice echoed up the stairs. "Is anyone home?" Then another man's voice. Griffin, Amy's husband. They didn't call my name, didn't ask how I was. They just walked in like the place already belonged to them. "Where's Lana?" Griffin asked. "Probably out, Mom's resting too," Benjamin replied. "Relax. She won't hear a thing." I gently closed my eyes, forcing myself to stay calm. My left hand rested lightly on the table to steady the shaking. Through the earpiece, their voices came through clearer than ever. "What's going on with the Lakeview house?" Griffin asked, lowering his voice. "Almost done. I just need Mom to sign the updated POA and I can sell it immediately," Benjamin answered confidently. "You know, the Austin investors are ready to offer $1.5 million if we close by next week." "And her? She doesn't suspect anything?" Griffin asked hesitantly. "No, she doesn't have a clue. Still thinks she's in control. Honestly," Benjamin let out a soft chuckle, "she's just a deadweight leech, sits there, pretending to read documents while we carry all the responsibility." I heard every word, didn't miss a single breath. A deadweight leech. That's what my son thought of his mother. I bit my lip. My trembling hands clenched so tightly that my fingernails pressed into my skin. My heart didn't feel like it was being stabbed. It felt empty, frozen, like the room had been drained of all its air. The Lakeview house. That was where I gave birth to Amy. The home with honey-colored hardwood floors David installed himself, with the arched window that welcomed the first light of day, where I rocked my daughter on the old wooden chair my mother left behind. I once told Benjamin, "Never sell Lakeview. That house is part of my flesh and blood." And yet today, the very child I carried and raised was using it as investment capital, as bargaining chips for a few numbers on a contract he called a golden opportunity. Griffin continued, "If we wrap this up, I can help you cover some of your personal loans. My company's short on cash, too. We're doing the right thing, Ben. That estate's going to be ours anyway. Benjamin replied, calm as if discussing dinner plans. Sooner or later, Mom won't be mentally sound anymore. The earlier we do this, the fewer legal issues down the line. I couldn't breathe. My whole body turned to stone. Not because of the money, not because of the house, but because of the cold calculation in their voices. The cruel precision from someone who once called me Mom. Memories hit like a violent wave. I remembered when Benjamin was 10, burning with a high fever while David was away on business. I stayed up for 3 straight nights wiping his forehead, boiling ginger water, reading while keeping a hand on his head to monitor his temperature. I remembered the look in his eyes the day he got accepted to college, how he hugged me tight and said, "If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here today." And now I was just a burden. When Lana returned, I was still frozen in my chair. She set the groceries down and rushed to my side when she saw my face. "Are you okay? You look so pale." I didn't answer. I just raised my hand and motioned for her to sit. Then, I placed the tiny earpiece in her palm and gently tapped her knee. Lana put it on. I played back the recording I'd saved. She listened silently, her eyes widening, then turning red. When it ended, she gripped my hand tightly. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't see this coming." I nodded slightly. My chest still ached. Not because I hadn't suspected something, but because part of me had hoped I was wrong, had hoped it was all a misunderstanding. But now, I knew. There was nothing left to doubt. I leaned my head against the chair's backrest, eyes drifting toward the grayish-white ceiling. The place I once thought would be my peaceful final home had become the rawest stage of betrayal. And not from strangers, but from the very children I once protected with everything I had. That evening, I sat alone in my study, lit only by the small lamp near the window. The house was eerily quiet, but not the kind of silence I used to fear. I felt like I was in control of it. As if silence was no longer punishment, but my ally. I opened the third drawer on the left side of my desk. It was where David used to keep all our important documents: property deeds, contract copies, handwritten notes in his distinctive slanted script. I flipped through them one by one until I found a pale brown business card. Under the soft light, the embossed letters appeared clearly. Cole T. Henderson, Manifesto and Personal Asset Attorney. I had met Cole once, years ago, when he helped a friend of David's settle an inheritance dispute. I remember David saying, "Cole doesn't sugarcoat things, but once he's on your side, he defends you to the end." I had kept that card ever since, never thinking today would be the day I'd need it. The next morning, I asked Lana to arrange a private meeting at Cole's office. Not at the firm, not at the house. I didn't want Benjamin or Amy suspecting anything. Cole welcomed me into a wood-paneled room filled with classic paintings, warm light reflecting off his glasses. "Deborah," he stood, shook my hand, his expression firm but kind. "Good to see you again." Lana mentioned this was a sensitive matter. I nodded and handed him a thick stack of handwritten notes. I had listed everything I wanted to do, everyone I could no longer trust, every detail I needed to verify. After reading, Cole sat in silence for a moment. "I understand. And I can help you with all of this. But first, I must ask, are you making these decisions of your own free will and in full mental capacity?" I looked at him for a long moment, then answered slowly, my voice low but steady, slightly raspy. "I'm not deaf anymore, Mr. Henderson. And I've heard enough." His eyes lifted. He didn't ask anything further. He opened his laptop and got to work. We began by revoking every financial power of attorney granted to Benjamin and Amy. I signed every form, every bank document. Cole had everything ready. All secondary access rights were terminated within 24 hours. After that, we transferred my personal assets, real estate, stocks, savings accounts, into a new trust fund, managed directly by me. I selected an independent financial trustee with no family ties, tasked with quarterly reports to Cole instead of my children. Should we update the will now? Cole asked. I shook my head. Not yet. I want to keep the current version so they don't get suspicious, but prepare the new one. I'll sign it when the time comes. At the end of the meeting, I had one last request. I want to send each of them an envelope. No name. Just one piece of paper. Cole looked at me, then gave a small smile. What do you want it to say? I gazed out the window. I heard everything. That night, I wrote 3 notes by hand, each with the same clear, deliberate message. I heard everything. I sealed them in plain white envelopes. No names, no logos, no return address. Lana stood silently beside me, asking nothing, gently placing each one in a cloth pouch. The next morning, she drove. 1 envelope at Benjamin's doorstep, 1 in Amy's mailbox, 1 at Griffin's office. No one would know who sent them. But I knew. Just reading that line would send an icy chill through their chest. I sat in the living room the entire afternoon, sunlight filtering through the blinds and casting soft beams on the floor. I didn't play music. I didn't turn on the TV. I just waited. Not for an apology. I knew none would come. I simply wanted to see how they'd react, knowing the old, deaf, fragile woman they thought had no fight left was still watching them, hearing them, understanding every word, every move. I sent invitations under the title An Evening of Remembrance for David Hensley, founder of D&D Properties. The letters were printed on thick ivory paper, paired with a black and white wedding photo from our early years. I didn't write much. Just said it was a gathering to reflect, to remember, to thank those who had been part of David's life and the company's legacy. Lana helped coordinate every detail. The event would be held on a Sunday afternoon, right in the villa's garden. We decorated with lavender and white orchids, David's favorites. I chose soft classical music, no host or MC. It had to feel like family, warm but dignified. I asked Lana to send personal invitations to the local paper, 2 finance journalists who had written about D&D, and a few of David's former partners, the ones I knew Benjamin and Amy would never expect. I wanted the guest list large and diverse enough that they couldn't manipulate the room like they usually did. 3 days before the gathering, Amy texted me, "Do you need us to bring anything?" I replied simply, "Just arrive on time, dress respectfully, and honor your father's memory." The night before the event, I sat alone in the library, flipping through old photos. There was one of David holding me from behind at our first construction site, both our faces covered in dust, laughing with our eyes squinted. I ran my hand over the image. Tomorrow, they'll see. I'm still standing, David. That afternoon, the sky was unusually clear. Sunlight bathed everything in soft gold. Guests began arriving. There were handshakes, belated condolences, polite small talk mixed with genuine memories. I moved from table to table, offering a calm smile to each person, speaking little, just listening. Some of those seemed naughty, talking about all the others' embarrassing hair. Benjamin and his wife were the first to arrive. He wore a navy mule suit with a gray striped tie, the kind of outfit I knew he picked to impress potential investors. His wife, Julia, had on oversized sunglasses and a flowing designer dress, clutching a thin file folder in one hand. I'd caught a glimpse, even though Julia tried to hide it. The folder was clearly labeled, Proposal for Internal Transfer of Personal Assets. Amy arrived next with Griffin. She wore a long black dress and carried a polished brown leather briefcase. She gave me a light hug, a hint of sweet perfume lingering, but that embrace felt colder than any board meeting I've ever attended. "Thank you for hosting this, Mom. Dad would be proud," Amy said, her eyes quickly scanning the courtyard. "I have a few documents I'd like you to look over later. You don't need to sign anything yet, just some paperwork to reorganize assets so the company can manage things more smoothly," she added, her voice trying to remain casual. I smiled, nodded gently, and pointed toward the tea table on the patio. "Set them there for now, sweetheart. I'd like to begin the tribute first." Just over 60 guests were present when I stood in the sunlit courtyard, the handheld microphone turned up just enough not to drown out the birdsong from the back garden. I wore an ash-gray silk dress with a high neckline, neat and simple. Lana had brushed my silver hair to one side and pinned it with one of David's old brooches. "Thank you all for being here today," I began. "This isn't a formal ceremony, nor is it any kind of announcement. It's just a day for me to say thank you to the man who walked beside me for nearly 40 years. I paused briefly, looking toward the large photo of David hanging in the garden, where sunlight poured in like a separate sky had opened just for him. David wasn't just the founder of D&D Properties. He was its soul. But what I want you to know today is that after he passed, I believed I wouldn't be able to go on. Then I lost my hearing. Everything fell into silence. And in that silence, I began learning how to listen. I saw Benjamin lift his head. Amy froze mid-motion, hand on her briefcase. To listen with my eyes, with trust, with the intuition of someone who once built everything from nothing. I didn't listen with my ears, but with the changes in people's eyes, in the careful choice of words, and in the quiet pauses they thought I couldn't sense. I paused. The air was so still you could hear the wind brushing the old oak leaves at the edge of the lawn. I saw Julia shift her shoulders slightly, as if about to ask something, but I continued. "Today, I'm not transferring anything. I'm not signing, not announcing the distribution of any assets. I just want to honor David and remind those around me that he left me a legacy that wasn't wealth. It was the strength to hold on to everything, including the truth." I bowed my head. Applause followed, scattered at first, then growing. A few people stood. A photographer raised his camera. Former colleagues stepped forward to shake my hand. I saw Cole standing at the far end of the courtyard giving a small nod. Benjamin said nothing, but his face was tense. Amy quietly set her briefcase down by the chair, her fingers tightening around the leather strap. I knew they were rattled. They had brought those folders thinking I would be vulnerable, emotional, that I would cry and sign without reading carefully. They never expected that today wasn't a farewell to power, but a reminder that I was still holding everything. And I hadn't even started unveiling anything yet. I still remember that moment vividly, as if every sound in the world had stopped to make room for one perfect second of silence before a storm. The garden held its breath as I stepped up to the small platform where I had just spoken of David in a voice both gentle and steady. I looked around. The guests were returning to their tables, cameras lowered. Benjamin was preparing to approach me with the untouched file in hand, and Amy stood frozen, still eyeing the briefcase under her chair. Lana silently placed the writing board and a marker on the easel as usual, expecting me to write a closing message. That had been my way of communicating for years, writing each word for everyone to read. They were all used to the idea that I could no longer speak. None of them were prepared for what came next. I stepped toward the board, picked up the marker. I could feel every eye on me. Impatient, tired, calculating. I saw Benjamin lean toward Griffin and whisper something. Amy blinked rapidly, clutching her bag strap, held the pen, then set it down. Slowly, I raised my hand to my ear and removed the tiny hearing aid hidden beneath my silver hair. The motion was subtle, but I could hear the faint click as it powered off. Then I turned to face my 3 children, Benjamin, Amy, and Griffin, and I spoke. "No need for the board anymore, Lana." My voice was low, clear, and gently echoed in the stunned silence. It rang like a bell in a cathedral. The entire courtyard fell silent. Guests stopped chewing. Someone set a wine glass down on the table. Benjamin's eyes widened, his mouth parted in disbelief. Amy took half a step back, her eyes wide. I inhaled deeply. Every cell in my chest felt awake again. After so many years, I was finally standing tall, letting my voice fill a space once more. "I can hear," I said slowly, "and I've heard enough." The rustle of wind through the leaves couldn't compete with the pounding hearts now echoing in the garden. Lana stood to my left and gave a small nod. Without needing a cue, she walked to the small laptop we'd prepared and pressed play. The screen in the center of the garden, where David's photos had been, suddenly went black. A familiar voice played through the speakers, loud and unmistakable, Benjamin's. "As soon as she signs the updated power of attorney, I can sell immediately. She doesn't have a clue. Still thinks she's in control." The air froze around me. Guests glanced at each other. One person covered their mouth. Another whispered in shock. On screen, hidden camera footage from under the living room tea table showed Benjamin and Griffin talking, clear as day. Griffin's voice followed. "Once this deal's done, I'll help you clean up your personal loans. We're doing the right thing, Ben. That estate's going to be ours eventually anyway." I didn't look at the screen. I looked at the three people standing before me. Benjamin, pale as a sheet. Griffin, stiff. Amy, frozen in place, her face gone white. I continued. "I heard them call me a leech, dead weight," I said, eyes locked on Benjamin. "The same woman who carried you into the ER when you broke your arm falling off the swing set, who stayed home 10 straight nights nursing your fever. In return, you planned to strip me of everything while I was still alive and aware." I turned to Amy. "And I heard you call a lawyer to try and have me placed in a care facility, just so you could gain legal control. You said, 'We need to do this soon, before she changes the will.'" Amy opened her mouth, but I raised my hand. "No need to explain, because this isn't even all of it." Lana played the second recording. Amy's voice came through clearly on the phone. "I'm looking for a facility with the legal structure to allow temporary asset guardianship. Yes, I'll be the guardian." I said nothing for a moment. I let that sound echo, slicing through the illusion of perfection. The guests were visibly shaken now. A few company board members stood up and stepped back. One reporter raised a video camera, only to be gently blocked by security staff. Finally, I spoke again, my tone steady. "Today isn't about inheritance, and it's not a farewell party. It's a tribute to David, and I believe if he were here, he'd want me to speak. Not for revenge, but to protect the dignity, the mind and the life of the woman he trusted never to back down." I turned to Lana. "Turn it off. That's enough." I looked around. "I'm sorry if what you heard made you uncomfortable, but truth must be heard, not just with ears, but with the heart. And I've listened with both." I stepped down from the platform, leaving behind a thick silence where every sound felt out of place. No one moved. No one dared speak. I quietly walked toward David's photograph, and I stood there, listening to the sound of myself still standing tall. Before I could return to my seat, Benjamin rushed in front of me, his voice trembling, almost whispering in desperation. It's not what you think. I just wanted to secure the future. You know it's been tough for us these past few years." His voice cracked when I didn't answer, only looked into the once innocent eyes of my eldest son, eyes now filled with panic. Amy stepped up behind him, clutching her purse tightly, her face still pale. "Mom, I didn't mean to hurt you. I just thought you needed help. We could do better if you gave us more time." Griffin slowly approached as well. His usual smugness was gone, replaced by confusion and quiet disappointment. But unlike the other two, he said nothing. He just stood there, silent, like he was waiting for a sentence to be handed down. I looked at them one by one, faces I had once cupped in my palms, wiped tears from, soothed through fevers, and comforted through their first heartbreaks. Now each voice scrambled to justify schemes that had already been recorded beyond denial. "Do you know," I said, "what hurt me most wasn't that you wanted money. I was poor once. I know what hunger feels like. The fear, the longing for security, but what I cannot forgive is that you chose silence. You chose to treat me like a stranger. You chose to fake concern while secretly splitting up every dollar your father left behind with his life's work." Benjamin stepped back half a step, lips moving but no words coming out. I looked at Lana and signaled. She handed me a dark blue envelope containing a notarized copy of an official document. "I want to share something important with all of you here today," I said, turning toward the crowd. "David and I once drafted a contingency inheritance plan for the possibility that one of us might pass. After he died, I kept all clauses intact. Until recently." I handed the document to our lawyer, Cole Henderson. He stepped forward, took the microphone, and began reading. "According to the clause enacted this past October, all shares of Stonebridge Technologies, valued at approximately $213 million, along with 3 properties owned by Mrs. Deborah Stone, including the Longview Estate, the Manhattan Apartment, and the Colorado Ranch, have been legally transferred to a nonprofit entity named the David and Deborah Community Foundation." A wave of whispers rippled through the guest rows. Many couldn't hide their shock. Even some board members of the company leaned in to speak to one another in hushed tones. I stood still, letting the wave rise and then settle. "This foundation," I continued, "will operate with the mission of providing education, vocational training, and legal counseling for the deaf community. Those who have been left behind simply because they couldn't hear or because the world chose to pretend it didn't hear them." I paused, eyes still on my children. "As for the family, it's not that I didn't think of you. I just chose a different way to help." Amy clutched her bag, her voice cracking. "Mom, are you abandoning us?" I gently shook my head. "No, but I can't keep rewarding betrayal." I handed Cole a second folder. "I've asked the foundation to establish a review mechanism. Within the next 3 years, any one of you who can show you're truly living with responsibility through your work, social contributions, and transparent cooperation may qualify for personal support or even be reinstated in the inheritance list." Benjamin looked at me, stunned. 3 years? You're turning us into applicants?" "No," I replied, voice calm but steady. "I'm giving you the chance to rebuild, not with words, but with action, the way I once did with nothing but my hands." Griffin asked, his voice tight. "What if we say no?" "That's up to you. But remember, this wasn't taken from you. You gave it away with your choices." The garden felt suffocating in its silence. Many guests lowered their heads. A few clapped, softly at first, then louder, not like a victory cheer, but like quiet acknowledgement for a woman who chose to stand after a lifetime of being pushed aside. I wasn't looking for pity. I didn't need admiration. I just wanted people, especially my children, to understand. Listening is a privilege, but some who can hear choose not to understand, and some who seem silent are the only ones who've kept their true voice. And now I've spoken, clearly, powerfully, in front of everyone. The news of Benjamin being forced to step down from his executive position appeared in the local business section exactly 1 week after the board meeting. The headline was blunt, without euphemism. "Stonebridge Technologies CEO resigns amid internal conflict." No mention of the family scandal, but everyone knew a storm was brewing inside the company. Lana told me later that he left headquarters early in the morning before rush hour without saying goodbye to anyone. Just walked straight to his car, a worn gray coat draped over his shoulder. No tailored suit that day. Not long after, I heard he had taken a job as a delivery driver for a suburban courier company. He used to signal drivers from his second-story window with a horn. Now, he was the one saying thank you to each customer, collecting signatures in snow and rain, waiting on others' porches while the house he grew up in no longer welcomed his name. I wasn't happy. I wasn't sad either. I just noted it quietly. A man who once spent 30 minutes each morning adjusting his tie in the mirror now bent his back to carry boxes up a stranger's steps. As for Amy, I didn't hear it directly, but the foundation's financial manager reported that the house she lived in had been illegally mortgaged. It was still under my name, but used as collateral for her husband's investment loan, a legal loophole that fooled the bank, but not my lawyer. I didn't raise a fuss, I just demanded a recall. Within the week, Amy and her husband were forced to vacate the nearly 4,000-square-foot home in Santa Clara. They moved into a small rental near the highway, behind a convenience store and a noisy parking lot. I didn't hate them, I just no longer allowed them to use my name as a VIP pass. I didn't expect remorse, so when a letter arrived from Ellie, I spent a few minutes just staring at the handwriting on the envelope. A slanted line of print, not rushed, a little unsteady but neat. To Grandma Deborah. I opened it with both hands, cream-colored paper, the ink still fresh. Grandma, I don't know if this letter will reach you because people say you don't read handwritten mail anymore, but I wanted to write anyway. That day, I was there. I sat in the back row and I heard everything you said. You didn't know, but when you removed your hearing aid and spoke, I cried. I cried because I'd never seen you that strong, and also because I was ashamed. Ashamed that I ever thought you were too old, too tired, too powerless to matter. I'm sorry. Not because I did something clearly wrong, but because I stayed silent while others used your name for things you never agreed to. I don't know what the future holds. Dad is always angry, Mom cries every night. But I know one thing. I don't want to be like them. I want to live the way you've lived. Not for power or money, but for self-respect. Do you remember the red hair clip you gave me when I got an A in English? I still have it. I wear it whenever I need to remind myself that someone once believed I could listen and be heard. I love you, Ellie. I placed the letter on my lap, my hands trembling slightly. Not from simple emotion, but because in all the storms I had weathered, this was the first time I saw a seed finally take root and grow. That afternoon, I called Lana and asked her to find a way to send Ellie another letter. No money inside, no promises. Just one sentence, handwritten on plain white paper. I still listen, and I'm listening to you. I didn't know what Ellie would do in the years to come. Maybe she'd grow up with many options, maybe she'd stumble. But as long as there are young people in this world who dare to apologize, who dare to face the truth and choose a different path, then I believe even the smallest voice can bring change. And sometimes, those who seem the smallest are the ones who hear the clearest. The first morning Ellie moved in with me, it was drizzling. She arrived earlier than expected, knocking on the door in an oversized khaki coat, a backpack slung over her shoulder, and a tiny pot of lavender in her hands. I brought you flowers, Grandma, Ellie said, her eyes a mix of nervousness and hope. This kind is supposed to help people sleep better and feel less stressed. I took the pot from her and smiled. I could use some help with my memory too, but we'll start with sleep. We set up the spare room upstairs. Ellie didn't ask for much, just a little space to hang her art, and the old-school desk I had kept from when I taught English literature at the local high school. I didn't ask her why she chose to live with me. I'd just made breakfast and left a warm glass of milk on the counter each night. But Ellie began to speak, not in long explanations, but in actions. The following week, she signed up as a volunteer at the Hope Sound Hearing Center downtown. I hadn't suggested it. I didn't make any introductions. She researched it herself, filled out the forms, and came home with a name tag that read, Eleanor Stone, Support Volunteer. You know, Ellie said as she folded pamphlets, on my first day, there was this old man named Louis. He spoke very softly, and I couldn't hear him because his hearing aid was broken. So we just sat there, each holding a book, and he pointed at the words so I could guess what he wanted to say. I asked, "And did you guess right?" Ellie nodded. "Twice right, 3 times wrong." But he still laughed. At night, I helped Ellie practice speaking slower and more clearly. I taught her how to read lips to support people with hearing loss. I even let her try my old hearing device, the one I used to hate after my surgery. Now I understood. The device was only a tool. Real listening was the true treasure. One afternoon, while I was making tea in the kitchen, Lana came in with a letter bearing the logo of the David and Deborah Community Foundation. Inside was a handwritten job application. Familiar pen strokes, hesitant but honest. It was from Amy. God. It took me months to build the courage to write this. Or not to ask for money. Not to beg for forgiveness. I just want a chance to begin again, if you'll allow it. I know you owe me nothing, not even one more opportunity. But I want to do something that matters. Not just to make things right, but to understand why you were still able to stand after everything. I'm willing to start at the front desk if needed. I just want to relearn what it means to live with dignity. From the very place you built with trust. Amy. I rested my hand on the letter when I reached the last line. Lana asked gently, "Would you like me to respond?" I paused for a moment, then said, "Invite her in for an interview, like every other applicant, but tell her not to call me Mom in the office. We're starting from the beginning." A week later, Amy arrived. Her makeup was light, hair neatly pinned up, dressed in a blouse and long skirt. She sat at the reception desk just inside the main doors, next to the potted plant Ellie cared for each morning. That first day, she didn't say much, but I noticed her stand up when someone with hearing loss entered. She offered them a notepad, smiled, bowed slightly. On the third day, a high school boy came in looking for scholarship information. No one from the foundation was available. Amy sat with him, pulled out a notebook, asked each question patiently, and translated everything for the support staff. She was careful, respectful. Not the sharp, impatient version I used to remember. That evening, I got home later than usual. Ellie was in the kitchen sautéing cauliflower in garlic butter. The aroma filled the room. I took off my coat, but hadn't even hung it up when the doorbell rang. It was Amy. She stood there, holding a box of French-style meat pies, the dish I used to make every Thanksgiving. "Mom, if you haven't had dinner yet." I stayed quiet for a moment, then stepped aside, letting her in. We sat at the wooden table near the window, warm light spilling over the wrinkles on our cheeks, over the quiet glances passed between generations. Ellie told stories from the center. Amy added a few words here and there. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I just smiled when Ellie shared how Mr. Louis gave her a handkerchief embroidered with her name in French, saying, "Your eyes look just like your grandmother's when she was young." That kitchen finally rang with real laughter. Not because we forced joy, but because each of us chose to stay. Each chose to speak. And I realized some voices don't need to be loud or perfect. Only honest. That's when they're truly heard. The morning in Dallas was clear, as if the whole city were waiting for something new to begin. I stood backstage at the newly built David and Deborah Community Listening Center, where every floor tile was a result of the long months we spent rebuilding together, and also the fruit of a year I spent learning to forgive and learning to listen with my whole heart. In front of me sat nearly 200 guests, former students from my teaching days, deaf patients from our early clinical trials, old neighbors, community fund staff, audiologists, and even complete strangers who had followed my journey since day one. In the third row on the right, I saw Ellie in the light green dress I had picked out with her the day before. Next to her sat Amy in a white blouse, a name tag pinned to her chest. Amy Moore, Community Program Coordinator. Both sat upright, eyes focused on the stage. When the MC announced my name, the room filled with applause and soft tapping from synced hearing devices, each signal a different way of saying, "We are listening." I walked up slowly, calmly. No speech notes in hand, no slides to present. I stood tall at the microphone, adjusted my hearing aid out of habit, then began. "Thank you all for being here today," I said, my voice carrying that familiar soft rasp. "But what I'm most grateful for is your patience, because I lost something precious for many years without realizing it." I paused, scanning the room. Everyone's eyes met mine. No rush, no pressure. I continued. "I used to think the scariest thing was not being able to hear the voices of those we love. But no. What's truly frightening is being surrounded by voices that no longer carry truth." There was a faint rustle. Someone below reached for a tissue. I slowed my voice even more. "After David, my husband, passed, I lived like an empty shell, letting others decide for me, speak for me, laugh for me, even grieve for me. But I forgot something. I could still listen with my heart, and that heart never accepted dishonesty." I turned slightly toward the large screen behind me, where a photo of David was displayed. He stood in front of our very first construction project, a modest housing site for veterans outside Austin. His hair was messy, shirt stained with mud, but his eyes sparkled like a child's. I didn't build this center to get my own voice back. I built it so that anyone who's ever been ignored, spoken over, or dismissed could find their chance to truly be heard and understood. I took a deep breath, then looked straight at Ellie and Amy. I once thought I had lost my hearing, but what I really lost was trust. Trust in the honesty of the voices around me. And all this time, I wasn't searching for my voice. I was searching for the courage to face the truth. The light softened slightly. Behind me, the screen slowly shifted to images of the center's activities. Sign language classes, listening therapy for deaf children, family support circles. A camera from the local TV station gently panned across the audience, capturing faces filled with emotion. A mother hugging her 6-year-old son with a hearing device. An elderly man wiping away tears as a photo of his late wife appeared on the screen. 2 young volunteers holding hands tightly. I ended with a single sentence, neither grand nor rehearsed, but the truest thing I've learned. It wasn't my voice that I had lost. It was honesty. And now, I've found it again. The applause began as a soft ripple, then swelled into a warm, rising wave. I bowed and stepped off the stage. No one had to assist me. It was just me, my small wooden cane, and steps that no longer trembled. The ceremony closed with a simple ribbon cutting. Ellie and Amy stood beside me, holding the white ribbon, the color of listening. That night, after the guests had all gone, I returned to my office at the center. On the desk sat the small framed photo of David I always carried with me. Him smiling, holding a cup of coffee I'd brewed the wrong way, but still drank without complaint. I rested my hand on the frame, sat down and whispered softly, "Do you see it now, David? I finally hear it all. Not just the things they said behind my back, but the truth, the forgiveness, and the laughter we once shared." I closed my eyes. I didn't need applause. I didn't need praise. Just a moment of quiet, enough to let my heart settle after everything. If you've ever felt invisible in your own home, if the ones closest to you have hurt you with words so casual yet so calculated, then maybe, just maybe, you'll understand why I chose to stand up, not for revenge, but to reclaim something simple, that honesty and love should never be lost in any family. I share this story not to reopen wounds, but to offer this. We can still begin again, even when we think there's nothing left to hold on to. Maybe you're holding on to something unsaid, a hurt that hasn't healed, or a loved one who once let you down. So let me ask, what would you do if you were in my place? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Every experience, every reflection, might be a guiding light for someone out there who's still struggling. And if you believe that family stories, raw, painful, but also full of hope, deserve to be heard, don't forget to follow this channel. Because who knows, the next story might be something you've lived through, or something you need to hear to finally forgive someone else or yourself.